listening to Perfume on the radio.
On lookout
The roses. Aesthetically pleasing, summer's teasing. They keep spilling over the garden fence. 101 ways with roses. Hoarding precious petals in my Omar's hand-woven cane basket. Textural, smooth, velvety delights. Still alive. Some jammy, hot from the sun. Wind swept, a little green. Feel it on your cheek. Softer than anything.
That was Donna Lipowitz with her poem Roses. Donna is a member of the Perfume Lovers Writing Club, which is a group of students at the Institute for Art and Olfaction that banded together to explore the relationship between scent and the written word. You'll hear from more of them over the course of this show. Today's episode is about natural materials and perfumery. But what is natural? What is synthetic? The easy answer is this. Natural materials come from, nature. A leaf is natural, but a brick is not. And yet a brick is made of natural things, so maybe it is natural. Is an anthill natural? What about a beehive? What about a wooden shack or a mansion in Monaco? A bicycle or a car? Humans are part of nature's pantheon. Does what we produce therefore not qualify as natural? In perfumery, materials are often delineated along lines of origin. Natural comes from nature, synthetic comes from man's nature. A rose is obviously natural, but you can't just jam a rose into a bottle and call it a day. You have to process it, usually in a complicated way. The hand of human, in other words, is always busy, manipulating those natural perfume materials. Synthetics, however, are even more manipulated. A term that, as chemist Alexis Saint-Gelais explains, describes aromatics that have no known natural form. The synthetic is broadly defined as being the product of human ingenuity. And if we insist on defining natural as real and synthetic as fake, then we're in a bit of a pickle, because some of these so-called synthetics originally came from nature. One might even argue that everything made by the human hand is, in its own way, natural, inasmuch as humans are, say it with me, part of nature. Okay, I'll stop now because this is a rabbit hole I can go down, and with pleasure. But suffice to say that like life, like love, and like bureaucracy in Cuba, it's complicated. But I do often wonder, is Dolly the cloned sheep less of a sheep because she was cloned? Or does her obvious sheepiness trump her origins? She was, after all, born that way. In this episode, we explore the impact that nature has on perfumery, or the impact that perfumery has on nature. We're joined today by Simon Constantine of And Fragrances and by Mandy Aftel of Atelier Perfumes. Rounding out the show, Donna Lipowitz, who you already heard from, Sara Rashkin, and Virginia Riley of the Perfume Lovers Writing Club share some pieces about nature. Perfume on the Radio is a bi-monthly program presented by the Institute for Art and Olfaction. We're based here in the definitively synthetic Los Angeles, where the smells are surprisingly real. You can't get much more real than burnt rubber and engine oil. Oh wait, I forgot. Those are fake. My name's Saskia Wilson-Brown, and I'm the founder of the IAO, and I'll be your tour guide for Perfume on the Radio, Episode 11, A Perfumer's Nature. And just in case my ruminations on natural versus synthetic bummed you out a bit, I want to start the show with an incontrovertible quote from Sara Rashkin. Nature is painting for us, day after day, pictures of infinite beauty, if only we have the eyes to see them. My first guest on this episode is Simon Constantine. Simon is the co-founder of Lush's Guerrilla Fragrance. More recently, he started his new perfume line, And Fragrances, which is dedicated to transparency with materials and an ethical supply chain. When I called him, he had just come back from melting some tonka bean. His hands were all aromatic, and tonka was on his mind, so I started our conversation asking him what tonka bean was. Here's Simon.
Tonka is, well, it's an Amazonian hardwood. The reason, obviously, perfumers like it is that it's not the actual wood; it's the nut or the bean from the tonka tree. So it's this really kind of rich It has always been called a vanilla substitute, but actually I think it's nice enough to be something in its own right. It's very high in coumarin, so you get this really nice, rich, warm, sweet hay note with it. I think tonka as a flavouring is really popular in like French patisseries and things like that, but it's banned in the States because of the coumarin, which is a precursor to warfarin. So they're quite worried that it would interfere with heart medications. But coumarin itself is an aroma chemical that occurs naturally in tonka. It's a little bit in lavender, I think, as well, and a few other places. So it's that kind of warm hay note that you get in those materials. And you can use it synthetically, but also it's naturally occurring in tonka.
I think coumarin was one of the first synthetics, isn't that right?
It could well be. My knowledge of synthetics is poor, so you can pick me apart on that. But yeah, I think you're right. Yes, it's one of the first synthetics.
It is. It was discovered. It was isolated in 1820, and then it was synthesized in 1868 by William Henry Perkin, who also discovered the dye mauve, I think it is. Anyway, it's some fun facts for your chemistry class.
Yeah, brilliant. That's why I come here. Every day's a school day.
So are a lot of the naturals that you use, are they mostly sourced from, where are they mostly sourced? All over the world, or?
Yeah, I think the thing that I love about naturals in particular, and why I prefer those, is that they do sort of take you into all sorts of interesting corners of the planet and unexpected places. So like with tonka, an Amazonian bean that is quite supportive of indigenous, if you buy it properly, is quite supportive of indigenous groups in East Amazon, for instance, is one of those kind of like, oh, I didn't, you wouldn't ordinarily know that. It's sort of, you suddenly in this little corner of the world that's fascinating. So there isn't any one place that I think is better for aromatics, especially now, because they're grown quite, all over the world, and people have played and experimented all over the world now with what you can get.
So you said if you buy them properly, they support the tribes. So what happens? Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Is there a way that it doesn't support the tribes?
Yeah. If you are in remote communities where you have access to these crops, but you don't necessarily, they're the wild harvested crops, you can end up with these kind of rogue collectors who, obviously, if they're the ones who are able to sort of leverage power, quite often you can find that communities and in groups end up in the pocket of the collector. So sometimes they don't pay; they pay in kind. So it's kind of in a barter system. I've seen that where it's kind of, here's a bag of rice and here's some sugar and things like that, and so the value isn't really recognised. And then it depends where you add value. So the other place you have to watch out for that going on is if you have someone who's got the technology. It's this sort of Marxist look of, kind of, if somebody has the means to add value to that product, they can sometimes use that to suppress local farmers and kind of workers and stuff like that. So that can happen. I haven't been out to see tonka in the field. That's one thing that I'd love to be able to do, but at the moment, because of COVID, in particular, indigenous groups in the Amazon are really suffering from the effects, and it's impacted on the collecting of tonka this year. I've heard that a couple of reports where they're not able to go out and about. So, but yeah, that's where you'd look out, making sure that you don't have people interrupting the supply chain in a negative way.
It sounds like there's a lot of ethics attached to working with these materials, which I think probably a lot of people aren't really aware of. I'm curious about the ethics of collection and of supporting people, but then there's also the ethics surrounding sort of the human desire to consume everything. I'm thinking, for instance, of sandalwood, and I'm not sure if this is true, but I have heard that the sandalwood forests in India have been decimated. Is that true?
Yeah, well, as far as I know, there's very little indigenous sandalwood left in South India. I think that it kind of varies in terms of how much there is and how successful replanting is and stuff, because of this sort of illicit market that sprung up. When I was first working in Lush with perfumery materials, we were buying ag-marked Indian sandalwood. So the ag-mark was the official seal of the Indian government to say, yep, this is all above board. But it soon became clear that you couldn't really offer that kind of line of sight. This is the whole Veerapan story, the sandalwood smuggler Veerapan. He created this kind of fiefdom in the forests of Tamil Nadu, smuggling elephant ivory and sandalwood and guns. But he kidnapped Bollywood stars and march them out into the woods and stuff, into the forest, like hundreds of miles, and kind of hold them hostage and things.
Who was this guy?
Veerapan. We've got a very interesting created years. It was a few years ago. We did something called Smuggler's Soul, and then we created a graphic novel. This is with Guerrilla Perfumes, all around the sandalwood smuggling. And me and yes, who I was working with on the essential sourcing, we went out and we'd been to South India and we'd met some of these smugglers and kind of seen their factories, which were on the coast. So they're in Goa, which is, there aren't any sandalwood trees there, but there are ports that you could rapidly get sandalwood oil out of the country. Yeah, so we've done a little book on that. I can see it just there. I've got one copy just here, but yeah.
And I just looked him up, Veerapan, and he has this incredible mustache.
We did a moustache wax called Veerapan, but we've had, I don't know if it's something to be proud of, but I've definitely had at least more than one petition to withdraw a perfume. And one of them was that because people said we were glorifying smuggling and elephant poaching, but obviously the idea was to bring attention to the fact this was going on. Yeah, there's a Bollywood film made of him. I've not watched it. Big explosions and all that stuff. Yeah, he was a real character, but that was with ag-marked sandalwood, so you could never really say that it was properly harvested and looked after. And then because of the way it's very difficult to regrow, and then because of this sort of this gangster element, it kind of it makes it difficult to secure it and look after it for the future.
So if somebody wants to consume naturals and work with naturals or buy perfumes made of naturals, but also wants to make sure they're part of the solution, do you have any advice or tips or sort of things to look out for?
I think it is difficult. It definitely is difficult. That's not to put people off, but I think that you get these. I've had conversations with more conventional perfumers who say like, well, if you really love nature, I'm not doing a French accent with them. They're quite often French perfumers. Of course. Yeah. But if you really love nature, you would use synthetics because you don't have to harm nature. But obviously we know that the world's a bit more complex than that. And then you have the other side where you have the ultra natural brigade, I guess, which are all naturals are perfect and synthetics are terrible. And actually, I sort of sit in this. I was thinking about this it's probably going to be the wrong analogy, right? Clean beauty. Like sometimes, and I think a lot of people like this, sometimes you like it a bit dirty. So clean beauty, it probably isn't 100% me either. I think that the transparency angle, I think, is correct. And then taking everything on its merit and looking at it. Sandalwood from South India that's supporting a smuggler, you probably wouldn't buy. Sandalwood from West Australia that is supporting Aboriginal held lands and indigenous cultures, you probably would buy. It gets a little bit complex if you're, and you sort of have to use your intuition as well. So I haven't got all the answers, but I definitely feel like my preference is for naturals. I think there's a really big space for those. And I think that the industry should really look after them, not use them up and move over to a synthetic once they've been used. You should take a bit more responsibility. But I also think that aroma chemicals play a big part as well.
Are there any particular materials to make sure to look out for? So you mentioned sandalwood. Any others that you can think of?
Well, oud for a long time was a real issue. I think that there's quite a few people who have kind of cracked that and kind of they're more plantation grown. But I think that still you're going to end up with those issues that something like agarwood, oud, might be a long-term problem. Rosewood is a continual problem. I think frankincense is a continuing problem at the moment. I think that there are, issues around that. So there's plenty of tricky materials out there. But to say absolutely not, don't use it, it makes it difficult because if you use it in the correct way and support people in the right way, it could be an amazing asset. It's a mentality shift. So that's what always puts me off these hard sort of boundaries. It's very difficult with materials because it's not really the material's fault. It's not evil. No.
It's the humans that are evil.
Yeah, misguided. Misguided, I would say. Yeah.
Evil is a strong word, you're right. Oh, a little follow-up question. You said that oud had been a problem. Can you say why? Yeah,
oud, agarwood, incense trees. Forestry is tricky anyway, so you tend to have more problems with those because they're finite sources if you really have to fell the whole tree to take whatever it is. And agarwood and oud, agarwood is the tree, Aquilaria sinensis, I think, is the type that I've seen grown. And it's this wound, the legend has it kind of wound that the tiger comes along, it slashes the bark and it infects it and you get this fungal rot. And then you get the oud, the precious oud, which is then traded just as pure incense and then distilled into an oil. And it's, obviously become incredibly popular in the last sort of 10 years. Oud perfumes are really taken off and everybody's sort of splashing it about the place. And I do believe that there are really good quality plantations where you deliberately wound the tree and inoculate it, and you kind of go about it that way. At the same time, there's plenty of reports in Southeast Asia. I've heard people who have been out in the field, and there was one guy, he was out in the field filming for a wildlife documentary, and then he could hear the chainsaws in the background, and the gang he was with, they were local guides and stuff, just said, we need to get out of here. It was people, oud smugglers, so they were taking trees from the wild. And that's what makes it a bit difficult. It's too easy to go out, cut a tree down, take this material. No one really knows where it's from, pop it in the supply chain and tell everyone it's sustainable. I know that it will continue to be an issue. Where I got educated on oud, actually, strangely, was Hong Kong. Hong Kong means fragrant harbour. Hong Kong used to be a real hub for incense trees. And there's only like about 150, 200 trees left. And somewhere that's well resourced like Hong Kong, even now they have fences all around the oud trees and cameras on them, and even then people come and steal them. So yeah.
So as a brand owner, with your company, and is it and or on?
If you talk to someone who from a Scandinavian country, obviously then it's pronounced differently. Yeah. But we've co-opted because it's an Old English and Norse word, so I kind of feel like we can say it how we like, so we're just going to say and.
Yeah, fair enough. And what does the word mean?
It means spirit, breath, and ghost. It just seemed like it was the right fit, and I quite like the word and anyway from a regenerative point of view, as a sort of if you have an argument but you say yes and that kind of thing, you can add positive things to things. So yeah, I like the word, and the little bubble above the A is quite cool.
So as a brand owner for And Perfume, how do you see your role in this? I mean, I suppose you have a responsibility, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was really a big driver, if not the central driver, for me to create And, because I just feel like it would be nice to have that conversation more regularly in the world of fine fragrance. In ways, fine fragrance is ahead of the game, but in others, it's quite behind. Other industries are sort of facing up to climate change and extinction events and stuff a bit more rapidly. And I don't think perfumery should be left behind. It's well resourced, it makes money, it does well, people like it, but the conversation probably could be a bit more advanced. Yeah, it's a big thing, and a challenge a bit to myself as well. How do you actually embody those values and sort of you put yourself out there a bit and say all these big, bold things, but actually what does that look like, and providing sort of examples and just challenging yourself to make things even better, really.
That was the very awesome Simon Constantine calling in from Poole in the UK. You can learn more about Simon's new perfume line and fragrances at andfragrance.com. And we'll have Simon back, I hope, for a deeper dive into some of the issues he addresses in this chat because, well, it's kind of important, isn't it? Our next guest, Sara Rashkin, is a writer based in Los Angeles and a member of the Perfume Lovers Writing Club. Here's Sara with a piece called A Scent Walk Through the Los Angeles County Arboretum.
This April, I encountered a fragrant plant I'd never smelled before. Yellow bells, also known as Esperanza, which means hope. The bright yellow blossoms smelled like a bakery of sweets, like white cake with banana frosting. I came upon the flowering tree while exploring the LA Arboretum. I've been visiting the Arboretum every month or so to find what new smells emerge each season. My favorite smells from winter had all faded by April. Yellow bells were new for spring. But my first visit was last September. Though the Arboretum is near my home, I'd never heard of it until I was searching for a place where I could see in person an Osmanthus fragrans, the sweet olive tree. I'd purchased a small sample of expensive Osmanthus Absolute made from the tree's flowers for my collection of fragrant materials, and I loved the scent. The Absolute smelled of jammy peaches with an undertone of rich shea butter. I grew curious about the actual plant, which I'd never seen in nature, but when I found the tree in the Arboretum, the flowers on the Osmanthus fragrans had not come in yet. 2 months later, I returned to the Arboretum to try again, and this time the tiny pastel Osmanthus flowers were in bloom. They smelled lighter and more floral than my Absolute at home, but there was still the unmistakable presence of juicy peach. This changeability, we could even say unreliability, of nature might be what started me collecting smells to begin with. I've often wondered if my library of fragrant materials, resins, barks, absolutes, aroma chemicals, is in part a veiled attempt to transcend death. To make a world where the osmanthus never fades, and where the forest of osmanthus trees that grow in Guilin, China, and perfume that city in fall, can be transported to my living room in Los Angeles at any time of year in a tiny vial. Of course, my smell collection doesn't exactly recreate smells as they are in nature, and my materials actually do change over time, but I didn't fully know that when I started collecting. The promise of preservation called to me. The more I've learned and experienced with my smell collection, the more I've accepted that this too functions inside the human condition. Change is a given, and nothing lasts forever. Surprisingly, this acceptance has increased my appreciation for the fleeting, vague, and sometimes unknowable smells I encounter in nature. I may not be able to find the same aromas again. I may not be able to name them and identify their constituent chemicals, capture them and keep them. But I can still smell them, for the moment.
That was Sara Rashkin sharing a piece called A Scent Walk Through the Los Angeles County Arboretum. Because of time constraints, I had to edit Sara's piece down a little bit, so if you want to hear the full text, you can check out perfumeontheradio.com and find the blog section. Our next guest is Mandy Aftel, who is an American perfumer, the owner and nose behind the natural perfume line Aftelier, as well as the author of 9 books, including the very seminal Essence and Alchemy. She also recently started a museum called the Aftel Archive in Berkeley. Here is Mandy. I'd like to start out with the thing that I think defines you the most, which is this reverence and love for natural materials. So what is it about naturals that speak to you, Mandy?
Everything. Really everything. I think, first of all, their intense beauty, just how extraordinarily varied and nuanced and just gorgeous they are. I'm just knocked out by the complicatedness of their beauty aromatically. It's as if, nature is the original perfumer for me. And the way the different facets of the smells are fit together. I love the resonance of the materials with us as human beings throughout the ages and throughout the world. I find that very uplifting and connecting to other people using those materials. I love that they're open source, that people have had access to them everywhere throughout time. And I love their mysteriousness, that you kind of can't get at all of it, that they're not totally known. And I love that they're tricky to work with. I like working in an art form that gives you a lot of room to grow as an artist. And they really are challenging materials, and they give you a lot of room to express yourself and to grow.
Is that because they're complex? Is that what it is?
They're complex in that they're very mixed smells all on their own. They're a cocktail of aroma molecules, just each one. And in the way that perfume essences connect with one another, they meet up and make something new. And so it's a moving target as to which facet of that aroma will hook up with another facet of another aroma and make something either good or bad. And so it requires very intimate knowledge of the pieces of that aroma. It's a deep dive as a painter would make into color. And I really enjoy that.
And so that's quite different from synthetic materials, because synthetics tend to be quite a bit more predictable and sort of, bang on the money. So what do you think about synthetics? I mean, I know you don't work with them, but what do you think of them in general?
I don't know that much about them because I don't engage with them. I don't find them beautiful. And when I have smelled them, there's aspects of them that are just not appealing to me. Although I recognize they would be appealing to other people, they don't turn me on. And I like to work with what turns me on. I like to be around what turns me on. With synthetics, there's something about the texture and shape and the way the smell is that's just not as interesting to me. And so I kind of don't know. I don't know that much about them because they haven't attracted me.
It always feels to me like it's sort of like neon versus candlelight. The synthetics are they are what they are, and the naturals are sort of, they flicker a little bit.
Well, I also love the connection to nature and history. I really feel that in the complicated beauty of the smell. And I like working with something that has that sort of sensual history and that kind of energy packed into it. That feels to me like working with the gemstone.
Oh yeah, I could totally see that. I mean, but because of your passion and your interest in naturals, it's been pretty well documented, not only through other people, but also you've written about them extensively. And in your books, you've sort of taught a generation of perfumers about the beauty of naturals. And I think because of that, a lot of people like to put on you a position. They'll be like, well, I follow Mandy, therefore blank. So I'd be curious, do you have like a quote position in the sort of natural synthetics debate? I mean, are you anti-synthetic, as it were, or it's just not for you?
I don't even know what the debate is. Somebody just interviewed me and said they had heard you can't make a perfume with all naturals. Is that the debate? Or I saw a perfumer I know is going to really talk about the naturals and synthetics debate. I don't know what people are talking. What is the debate? Then maybe I could tell you if I had a position. Do you know?
That's a good question. I mean, I suppose it depends on the people, but the general thing that comes to me, at least, is are naturals better than synthetics?
I feel like are they better? Are they? It's sort of like not how I think. So it's hard for me. I've heard an awful lot of bad things about naturals from people who work with synthetics, that you can't make a perfume, that it's boring, other stuff that I can't relate to at all. It's been actually said to me. Some people I've taught work with synthetics. I really don't have any position about that. I think it's important to be honest about your ingredients. I think what I think about is there's so much rampant dishonesty about things that that part is kind of makes it impossible to figure out, what your position is and what you believe and what you like. So I personally love naturals and think that they're the most beautiful, and I really like working with them. But that doesn't mean anything for anybody else. I think it's more the kind of artistic mentality you have and the honesty and the integrity you have about your particular palette and what you're working with and what your goals are in terms of your art practice. Those are different things, and they don't really fall into people who work with naturals or people who work with synthetics. It's more about who you are as an artist.
That makes so much sense. Yeah. So it sounds to me like what you're saying is that you like naturals and you think they're beautiful, and as long as people are being true to themselves, they can do whatever the heck they want, right?
Yes, I do think that. And I think that part is important to me. I think that dichotomy or that dialectic doesn't make any sense to me. So it's hard for me to even engage with it. But that's kind of what I think. And I think, to be honest about what you're working with and why, that's more important. And to not be relentlessly marketing, which I think is unfortunate.
So let's talk about honesty for a little bit. And I know just full disclosure, you and I are friends and we talk about these things a lot. So what is it about the perfume world that you think lends itself to so much dishonesty? And I'm starting with an assumption that I think you and I can agree on, which is there's a lot of smoke and mirrors in perfumery.
So much. I thought about, first of all, I have this terrific analogy, which I'm very excited to share with you. I just love it. I think that the perfume industry is like a philandering husband who's always having affairs, always cheating on his wife. And the customer is the long-suffering wife who's always being lied to. I think of that about the marketing in the perfume world. There is a real dishonesty in the entire perfume industry that's been there for over 100 years. And I think that dishonesty is because there's so much money to be made. And I think the customer is really left out. And I think places like the IAO and some blogs and books that really speak to the idea that we as humans have really loved scented material on our skin across the globe, across time, that the customer, the consumer is very interested in this, and that the industry makes money and makes a lot of money by not being honest or respectful of the consumer, which is why I think indie perfume perfume outside of that has been such an enormous force. People are actually interested in that. And they've had no way of getting real information like you provide at the IAO, open source information, things in books, access to materials. I think the perfume world has changed since I got in it 30 years ago, but the level of dishonesty is still pretty intense, which you can see if you watch the Christian Dior movie, The Nose,
Which you watched today,
which
think,
I
right?
watched today, which was, I expected it to look like a travelogue, but it is entirely focused on ingredients that are all natural, which has very little to do with the perfumes that Christian Dior puts out.
Right.
It focuses on bergamot in a very unusual way of the Dior people going there, and the people who pick the bergamot have, dancing around as they're picking bergamot, which I find hard to believe does go on. This very kind of photogenic, small rose field, which I think is probably not where most of their materials come from. It's just the idea of presenting this story, the narrative about naturals, and not really including that in the perfume. It's using it for marketing.
Yeah. I mean, it's also interesting because, like, at the scale that, say, Dior or whoever, produces, like, that small rose field and those happy people picking bergamot, it's not realistic, because in fact, if they used naturals at the degree that they produce, they would decimate them. You know what I mean? Like,
yes, of course.
It's sort of like they're hiding the reality of what the impact of their sales would be on these beautiful materials. Yeah.
When I had an opportunity to perhaps be bought or to work for LVMH a long time ago, someone who's very high up was interested in me and sent my work to the perfumer there. Well, my first question to him was, if I was there, what would you say about the rest of your line? If you haven't told the truth about what's in the perfume, how could you ever start using natural materials? It's very interesting to look back. If you look back over the last, say, 100 years, you can see in the people in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 30s, people who are really just smitten with synthetics were still smitten with naturals. And they had a real sense about ingredients and the integrity of ingredients, whether they were natural or synthetic. It wasn't as pointed to the bottom line and making profit. And also the part that's unknowable, the part that can't be covered with science. There's a lot of posturing around science, I feel. There just wasn't as much of it. There was more of thinking about perfume as an art or thinking about perfume as an expression of something. And it was just a different mentality in the big perfume houses in those days.
Let's talk about size in perfume. And I know you intentionally have kept your practice and your output relative to these big companies quite small. Do you want to talk a little bit about why you chose to do that?
I find it a privilege to do work I believe in and that is creatively and aesthetically fulfilling and make a living. It's like a prize. I mean, it feels to me like such a special thing to be able to do. And I could only do it making a product that I feel is of the quality of my product if it stayed small and if I can attend to it. I enjoy the process of working as an artist. I enjoy all the menial and very aesthetic, from one extreme, packing the packages and writing notes, to creating the perfume. I like it all. And I feel very lucky that I get to do work in the world that I like and that people appreciate. It matters to me that things are of a quality that I believe in. And if it got bigger, I wouldn't be able to do it. And that would disturb me a lot. So I like keeping things very small because I love my work life every day. I get up and go to work. I'm excited to go. And that's very precious to me.
Have you ever felt pressure to get bigger?
No, I don't. I feel such a commitment to the people who like my things and to this process. And there'd be nothing to entice me. There's nothing better for me than what I'm doing. I've had a lot of opportunity to get bigger. I've had a lot of big deal opportunities come my way. I don't want a large bandwidth. I don't want those things. And money is not a driver for me. Once I have enough money, I really don't care about having more. And I do care about this. So it's not much of a decision for me. Earlier I would want to please people or want to do something or be more afraid, but I still didn't do it because I just didn't want to. And I am by nature not a joiner. I am by nature more of a loner. So it kind of comes to me.
Yeah, I mean, you've sort of created the path for an alternate way of approaching perfume, outside of sort of, more, sell. It's just sort of like, okay, let's commit to this as an art.
And also, people like our stuff. It's very gratifying. The people who find their way to me and they shop with me, they come back. A lot of them come back. A lot of them bring their friends. A lot of them write me notes. It's a very direct connection. I write notes too. It feels like very supportive, special community. And for example, people are endlessly expecting free samples. We've never given a free sample out in our lives. We've never had a sale. We've never done any of the things that people do. And we kind of train our customers not to expect that from us.
It really is about boundaries, isn't it? I mean, like, for instance, I know a lot of perfumers who are starting out and, they put out their first perfume or their first couple perfumes and they just get bombarded with sample requests or bloggers asking for full bottles in exchange for a review. And
yes, I think that you teach people how to treat you by the way you act. And so, sometimes, for example, I have wanted to send like someone a sample or whatever, but I don't because I know I can't continue with it, and I know it's the norm in the industry. So I know I have to kind of explain myself when I'm not going to be doing that, but it makes a sustainable relationship with the customer. For the customer that resonates with, then we're on the same track. They are, and we are together. And I feel like if your business is going to be sustainable, you have to do things you can continue to do.
Yeah. And then sustainable from another perspective, because all these samples that are getting sent around, it's just more stuff for the planet.
It's more stuff. And also if you want to be in fair exchange about your work, you want to value your work and you want to get other people that value it as well. And so when you give away a lot of stuff for free, I'm not sure it's valued. I remember at the very beginning of my career, I went to Vogue. And they covered me in Vogue. You kind of went around to the magazines. I did. I never had a press person. And I somehow saw the beauty products closet. And they had a closet with lots of things, perfumes and makeup and all kinds of things, which I think actually they donated to somewhere and did good with. But I looked at that closet and it stuck in my mind. And I thought, I never, ever want my products to be in a closet like that. I want wherever they go to be valued.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I went to a Sundance and I got somehow finagled. Someone brought me into like a gifting suite where they, give celebrities free stuff. And I was in there and they were just giving me jeans and shirts and jackets and products. And I was totally grossed out, I mean, not
me too.
Yeah. I mean, from the perspective of social justice, like, geez, there's homeless people. And then these affluent, famous people are getting all this free crap,
It's all wrong. It's all the wrong paradigm. And when I think about it, I'm very optimistic because of places like the IAO and because of good bloggers and because of my students who I think, are amazing. There's so much more openness about this now than when I began 30 years ago. And I think it's because human beings gravitate toward this. They just can't find their way. And all of these other aspects of it, the statusy or corporate pieces of it, I believe they're not doing as well as the kind of indie stuff is. It would be wonderful if the bigger places could be more honest about everything.
Mm. So how do you think they could start? Would it be just sort of being straightforward about what's in the perfume?
What's in the perfume? Certainly more honesty about natural essences and, how they need to be regulated. telling the customer the truth about what's in there, not acting as though he said that perfume is an artisan activity. The guy at Dior, it's not at Dior an artisan activity. Just saying things as what they are, and particularly telling the truth about what's in a perfume, and also not over dramatizing all of the quote dangers of using natural essences.
Actually, that's a really wonderful segue to a pretty big conversation. So we'll give it a little time, I think, is regulation. So for those who aren't familiar listening, there's a regulatory body known as IFRA, or the International Fragrance Regulatory Association, that regulates, materials. So Mandy, tell me what your top line thoughts are on that.
I think that IFRA, the perfume regulating body, which is run by there are 4 very large, very I don't know what to call them, profitable companies that are the major companies in the perfume world, and they indirectly and directly run this governing body, which makes it very hard to use heritage materials in perfumes that have been used for hundreds of years, and make it much easier to use synthetics in their place. Natural essences are infinitely more expensive and much harder to use in the large quantities that they need them in. And so I think there are a lot of secondary gains in making naturals so difficult to use.
And does IFRA primarily regulate synthetics or naturals, or or do they sort of?
They do regulate both, but they do it at the level of the aroma molecules. And so, since natural essences are a cocktail of so many molecules, once they make certain molecules no longer able to be used, they rule out things like rose or many other things,
right?
Or lavender. They make it very difficult to use those heritage materials that have been in man's life for hundreds of years.
So an example would be, for instance,
it leans in toward great profits for the synthetics.
Because the naturals are then replaced by synthetics.
Yes, and there's an awful lot of promotion of that as being safe and a good idea.
Yeah, it is interesting because, for instance, the big one people talk about is oak moss. Most often people come to it from oak moss, and, oak moss is something that was used in perfume for, centuries.
Yes, oak moss is a miraculous thing to use. And in terms of looking at the material and looking back at the material, I just recently read something in an older perfume book where they talk about regulations there, but it's nothing like this. It's nothing. And the ingredients haven't changed. But it was way before IFRA was as powerful as it is. And when they talk about regulation or allergies, they have a whole bunch of ways of dealing with that didn't ban ingredients.
That's interesting.
You have to follow the money, and you have to ask yourself, in whose interest is this in this, multi-billion-dollar industry?
Following the money, it's like a great detective story, isn't it?
Yes, following the money, which is the philandering husband idea. There's so much money to be made by betraying the customer.
Yeah, it's interesting because the marketing language around scent definitely is naturals oriented.
There's no narrative without naturals, which is the fundamental reason why the business is so dishonest. They have no selling documents without naturals.
Wow.
You could be put down to that tiny sentence.
Are there any naturals that you're working with right now, or that you've newly sort of rediscovered, or that are speaking to you at the moment, that are inspiring you?
I teach a class, and all of my students get a small perfume organ. So I learn a lot in the class from the materials they choose to work with. So just watching where things go, it's endlessly fascinating to me what one essence or two essences do to another. Those teeny increments of change that happen when, say, you use rose instead of jasmine. So very recently, I managed to get some ylang concrete, and I'm very, very excited about it. I got it a long, long time ago through a lot of work and finagling. And ylang is a very creamy, banana-faceted floral. If you get the essential oil, it's got this kind of upward motion in the smell. It just kind of goes up. It's sweet, it's fruity. But the concrete, which is the step before they make the absolute, has this flat, rich, almost milky quality with the banana and heavy floral. And it's just the most beautiful form of it. So talking about splitting hairs, I have like the absolute version of it, and I have the essential oil version of it. But the concrete to me is the most fascinating. And so when I made my last perfume, which I made at Christmas time, it's called Violet Ambrosia. It's built around violet and broom. And broom is a very small flower from Spain and from France. And I managed to get this broom about 20 years ago. Someone had an old stash of materials and I bought them all. And the broom was in there. So it's at least 20 years old, but I think it's much older. And I tried making the perfume with the ylang essential oil. And I also tried making it with the concrete. And they were completely different. And so those tiny ways that the aesthetic differences show up are probably like what happens for a painter when they get the exact right color for some aspect of someone's face and the face becomes alive. Each little choice, each tiny move, each tiny difference in creating and remaking a perfume is very fascinating for me in its aliveness and its beauty or in its ugliness.
Right, because sometimes ugliness happens, right? There's no making without making mistakes, right?
Oh, I make a lot of mistakes, and I find it interesting. I find one thing about perfume very interesting is besides being carried away on this kind of sensual journey, there's a lot of thinking and analyzing when you're creating something in perfume about who's doing what to whom. How is this transforming by the interconnection of these materials, these personalities? And I find that a thrill.
In your museum, so for folks who aren't familiar, Mandy opened a museum, I think 2-3 years ago?
I think 3 years ago.
Yeah. In Berkeley, and it really highlights materials. So there's this organ in your museum that is, it's this beautiful sort of tiered table full of materials, and you can go in there and smell everything. And what made you decide to do such a strong focus on materiality in this space? I mean, I guess your love for materials, I suppose, is the answer.
From the minute we opened, and I try to go say hello to every guest, and we've had thousands of them. So I go out and I talk to them and I ask them, what they like the best, or if they have any questions. The centerpiece is the organ. Is they're really getting to smell things they've only heard about. And the diversity of them, the funkiness, the beauty, the strangeness, the overlap with stuff they've eaten. They just love having that experience. And I love seeing them learn about it, whether it connects them to food or whether it connects them to their garden or their imagination. And the most popular exhibit in my museum is the deconstruction of one of my perfumes. So I have the perfume there. Then I have all the top notes, all the middle notes, all the base notes in little bottles that they can smell, where you lift the lid of the bottle. It's very low tech and very uninvasive. So you choose to engage with it, and you smell each essence that went into the perfume by smelling the internal cavity of the bottle. People like smelling things. It's another universe for them, and it makes them happy. And I feel like I had no idea that would happen, but it has. When I see people smelling the materials in the museum, and they get to take, on a scent strip, 3 of them home with them, and they're just thrilled. They're just thrilled, and they come back.
There is something about engaging with smell where people just light up and open up, isn't there? I've seen it myself. Like people just their sort of shell melts away.
It's very pure. It's very happy. It's very personal and public at the same time. It's very sexy. It's a whole bunch of things rolled into one. When they really get to smell something alive, those materials are so alive, and they are thrilled by them. And I still am too. 30 years on, I'm still thrilled by the materials. I couldn't say that about a lot of things.
All these years later, that is something.
I mean, really, I'm done. Been there, done that. Thank you very much. Not so much about that.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about your life before perfumery, Mandy. I know you were a therapist, and you were a writer, and you were a rock and roll writer, in fact. So can you just tell folks a little bit about sort of what led you to scent?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I've sort of followed what I'm interested in life, and I'm very focused when and also I'm not a person who likes lots of different things. So if I like something or a person, I like it a lot. I'm very sort of tunnel vision. So I loved being a therapist. I got interested in Brian Jones from the Rolling Stones, 3 lifetimes ago, and was very curious how his life turned out the way it did, which was a mess at 27, when he was so gorgeous, so wealthy, so talented, so interesting. I was curious what had happened, and I hadn't expected to get anywhere, but I loved rock and roll. And I just decided I would pursue trying to find out about that. And in the 70s, early 70s, it was kind of something you could do. And toward that end, I went to London, and I ended up spending time with Keith Richards and Anita Pallenberg and the inner circle of the Rolling Stones. And I knew a lot about Brian's life. And then I went and lived in Joshua Tree with Donovan, the singer, and his wife, Linda, who was Brian Jones's first significant relationship, and went to Morocco, where he had recorded the musicians in Tijuca, and came home with all this material and ended up writing a book about Brian Jones. I was interested always in the creative process, and I had a master's in counseling and became a therapist for artists and writers, mainly because I was very interested in other people's lives and interested in novels and fiction and movies and how life kind of plays out. I worked in private practice for 30 years and wrote a couple books, one about therapy called When Talk Isn't Cheap, and another one about narrative called The Story of Your Life. And then when I finished that book, I decided I wanted to be a perfumer. I decided I wanted to, write a book about a perfumer. And I wanted to learn about perfume, but I don't know why. It wasn't a logical decision. It was kind of came from outside of me. And I began to collect books about perfume. The old books about naturals were just a knockout. I loved reading them. I loved the people that wrote them. They were very eccentric and sensual, and the practices that went with them were interesting to me. And I started a perfume line with a friend. We took a class, which was research for my book, and I kind of had a knack for it. And we started a line of natural perfumes that launched at Bergdorf Goodman's.
Wow.
And I made all the perfumes and she did all the business. And we lasted like a year or two. It's called Grandiflorum Perfumes. The business fell apart between us. And obsessive as I am, I had collected, 50 or more books. And my editor of my book on therapy, who turned out to be my best friend, said, "Why don't you write a book for me on perfume?" So I wrote this book, Essence and Alchemy, I think 20 some years ago, based on those books, based on my perfume line, and feeling I really wasn't cut out for business and would probably maybe do custom perfume, but probably never do business again. And very slowly, had one perfume, and then I had another one. It took me a very long time to decide to sell anything. I didn't want to be in stores, but I started with an online business. I did go in a few stores, and I went on and taught. I got very interested when I went on a book tour for my book, Essence and Alchemy, in ingredients. And someone introduced me to Daniel Patterson, who is a 2 Michelin star chef, very interested in ingredients. And we hit it off really well. And we wrote a book together on using essential oils for cooking, which was again driven by my interest in essential oils and natural essences.
And that book is called Aroma, right? Is that
Aroma?
Yeah.
But what I realized was the most allied field to making perfume is cooking. The thinking process, the way of creating flavor, the integrity of ingredients, the joy you bring to people, how important it is to start with things that are good to begin with, the sustainability. And Daniel and I went on and did another book together called The Art of Flavor, which was based in the way that I made perfume and he made food, which was exactly alike. That whole creative process we shared. And I kind of just toddled on, doing what I had done with no real plan to do anything that I'm doing, including making a museum. That I kind of stumbled into too.
And you're working on a book about the museum, is that correct?
Yes, I'm working on a book about the museum, which seems to me to be taking forever. But what's happened in the process was I bought an old herbal stumbling along that came from the 1600s with these extraordinarily beautiful illustrations of plants. And I got into painting them so that I could put the plants themselves into the book. So I'm really full on talking about the essences as well as the very dynamic collection of all the animal ingredients I have in the museum. And there's 100 turn of the century books kind of highlighting 100-year-old oils, talking about the excitement of these materials and collecting them and sharing them with people. This cache of materials, it's been out there for a long time, but I collected them over the last 30 years, is a thrill to share with other people and other artists.
Yeah, that there's something about that sharing that is very meaningful. And I just made the connection, but with your background as a therapist, like this human connection that this practice of yours, that sort of interpersonal, like a sincere interpersonal relationship.
It does, and sharing joy is so intimate and important. You know, joy and to me, joy and gratitude for how life sort of rolls out. What happens in your life, the good and the bad. Life is such a rich, vibrant activity, and so are those materials, and so are the people who've touched it and made it and been a part of it, that you just feel like you're part of something that's timeless. And that is incredibly attractive to me. The timeless aspect of certain things in life, certain deep practices, certain deep feelings, that kind of well that we all spring from. Very rich to me, maybe because I'm so much older now, but it's a source of great inspiration to me.
Yeah, it's sort of beautiful continuity of humankind, beyond our individual lives.
It's why I believe the marketing is so off.
Right.
Because I feel like when you stand in that source and you feel those things, and you're coming from that and it's honest, there's such a beauty to that in life.
Yeah.
And I feel, your work that you do at the IAO really contributes to that. The lectures that you give, the classes that you give, the openness, the things that you've started, it's such a breath of fresh air to where it was so corporate when I first started. It's just, it's very exciting. And it's an exciting, developing, creative field. And that is very thrilling.
That is true, but it's still pretty corporate. It's not, it's a drop in the bucket,
I know.
I say that for both of us.
It is and it isn't.
Yeah.
It really is and it isn't. I think, I'm not sure how moribund that corporate world really is.
Yeah, but people seem to buy in. So
even the perfumers.
Yeah, actually, I always find that strange where people, we come across a lot of people who are new to the field, and more often than not, the questions we're getting is like, okay, but how do I become, quote, a real perfumer? I want to work for the companies, and you're like, why?
Really?
Why do you want to work for a system that doesn't want you, man? It's like.
I know.
I don't understand that. I think it's insecurity. I think people feel like they're not real unless they're part of that system, but it's so fallacious.
Well, there needs to be alternative narratives about that.
Yeah.
Because I think that when you belong to that system, or if you want that system, you'll fail. But I think what's happened now is there are other role models, other possibilities. I think it's more open now.
That is true. And actually, that's one thing that, Mandy, like, we have to look to you and thank for, because as far as role models for small scale, it's, sincere lines, I mean, you're the one.
And when I teach my classes, I often say, don't pay attention to anything out there. I do. I say, just do your highest value. Just do what you believe in. Because if it doesn't work, you've done something that you believe in. And if it does work, all the better. And I think I do, old hippie that I am, do believe if you do something you really believe in, that is your highest self, the best you can do, a growing edge, you do get somewhere.
Yeah.
But some of it is really being willing to fail and being willing to learn. Those traits are very important. Making bad perfumes, being honest with yourself about them, being willing to learn, being willing to continue to learn. All those practices are important practices for any artist.
Well, Mandy, that was, I'm really so happy we were able to spend this time. And I'm especially happy because I feel like your approach extrapolates beyond perfume. I mean, if people are taking these conscious and thoughtful approaches to what they make and what they put in the world, then the world will be a better place.
Well, thank you. Thank you for giving me a chance to speak my heart. People need to know that there is this other way.
That was Mandy Aftel. And that was our show, which we will close out with a text by Virginia Riley of the Perfume Lovers Writing Club. But first, some thanks. Darian, Zahedi, Maxwell Williams, and Stephen Rimlinger for the music, and always to Look Out FM for hosting this a little bit niche radio show. Perfume on the Radio is produced by the Institute for Art and Olfaction, which is a nonprofit based in Los Angeles. We are dedicated to accessibility and experimentation in the field of perfumery. You can learn more about us at artandolfaction.com. And don't confuse that with Art and Old Fashion. That's a whole different nonprofit. This episode, like all others, will be archived on perfumeontheradio.com, but if podcasts are your thing, you can also download it on a podcast provider of your choice and enjoy it in a location of your choice. I suggest you make like John Ruskin and take a nice nature walk. It's good for the soul. Our next episode will be guest hosted by John Beeple of January Scent Project, bringing us a meditational auditory exploration of sound and smell. For now, let's make some space for Virginia Riley to close out our show with her piece, The Ubiquity of Spring.
Some might balk at this title. The ubiquity of spring, they mutter. Eyebrow raised, lips pursed. Spring is glorious, they huff. Well, bear with me while I make my case. To me, the glorious nature of spring is in its commonality. In California, our golden poppy is the state flower. When I was a child, my Nana would take me to the high desert to see the wild poppy fields bloom. The baked earth would oh so briefly transform from arid and brittle to a land on fire. The air tinted with an exotic mix of deep green vine, woody earth, and black pepper. Today, I'm not sure how many people actually make the seasonal trek to the poppy fields. Nevertheless, the golden poppy roots itself everywhere, in tiny slits of concrete, beside freeways, neglected patches of soil in the neighbor's yard, and gives us our first sign that spring has come. This bloom is the manna of perfumers, prized for its opulent, deep, warm, floral aroma, and yet we pass it so often unnoticed. And then there's the common garden rose. You know what I'm talking about. It's the one rose bush that you walk past with your dogs every day or pass on your way to the car. It is scrambly, thorny, green, and brown. It is uninviting, and it is easily ignored. And yet, come spring, the garden rose gives us a theatrical production, costume in voluminous layers of tender pinks, sunny yellows, striated fuchsias, and velvety reds. It beckons us to a moment of distraction, as if to say, please stop and enjoy this show. If you do, your reward is the subtlest scent of honey and spice. But perhaps the most ubiquitous of all, and my personal favorite, is the pink jasmine vine. Unassuming, quiet, and gentle, its blush-hued buds open for a minute amount of time, as if spring is waving its hand in a casual greeting from the neighbor's fence, then graces you with the most astounding, heady, and spicy perfume after you've already nonchalantly passed it a few paces. Do you stop? Do you walk back to locate the source of that narcotic trail of scent? It is, like the poppy, the orange blossom, and rose, spring's generously common gift of glory. the promise of renewal, of health, of rebirth, and of second chances, if we stop and smell the roses.
That was The Ubiquity of Spring by Virginia Riley, gently edited for time reasons. Please visit Perfume on the Radio for the full unedited text. My name is Saskia Wilson-Brown, and this has been episode 11, A Perfumer's Nature. I'll see you next time, and until then, keep it kind, keep it natural, and keep it smelly.
You're listening to Perfume on the Radio.
On lookout,